They say that grief can make you invisible. I thought that losing my only son was the worst thing that could happen to me, until his widow told me to pack my things and leave the house where I had helped raise their children. With nowhere to go, I found myself in the back seat of my car, watching my life fall apart like cardboard boxes. But my son left behind more than just memories. He left me a plan, and the opportunity to get back everything I had lost. Sit back and relax, and I'll tell you my story. 68 years old, retired pottery teacher, proud grandma, and just recently, an unwilling nomad with a trunk full of regrets and a dashboard that knows too many of my tears. It all started with the kind of heartbreak that rewires your bones. I lost my son Oliver. Just like that. One day he was sketching flowers on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, and the next I was standing in front of a casket wondering how the world hadn't stopped spinning. He was my only child, my miracle boy, a gentle, quiet soul who could spend hours labeling dried herbs and drawing them like they were royalty. He made a modest living illustrating plant species for academic journals, tiny, intricate masterpieces that I could never stop bragging about. He also happened to be a wonderful father to his two little wild things, Emma and Leo, and a devoted husband to his high-strung, always slightly exasperated wife Marissa. Now, I never claimed Marissa and I were best friends. We didn't braid each other's hair or swap recipes, but I thought there was mutual respect. When she went back to curating her highfalutin art gallery, I stepped in to help. I sold my cozy little one-bedroom apartment, the one with my garden gnomes and floral teacup collection, and moved into their lakeside house. My job? Full-time grandma. I was a walking to-do list with a spatula in one hand and a crayon in the other. I did daycare runs, bandaged scraped knees, and read bedtime stories in character voices that deserved an award. I made sure the pantry had the good peanut butter, and that Leo never wore mismatched socks. For 5 years, I poured every drop of energy I had into keeping their little world from toppling. And then Oliver died. 10 days. That's how long I got to mourn before the rug was pulled out from under me. 10 days after the funeral, Marissa stood in the living room wearing silk slacks and a crisp blouse I'm pretty sure cost more than my first car, and said, and I quote, "You can't live here anymore. It's too much having you around." No warning. No sit down over tea. No let's figure this out together. Just a firm eviction with all the tenderness of a parking ticket. I stood there, hands still damp from rinsing breakfast dishes, staring at her like she just told me the son was being repossessed. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not even a squeak. My throat closed up like a jar of molasses. I think I nodded. I honestly can't remember. The world tilted and I found myself packing a decade of memories into 2 worn suitcases and a grocery bag. By nightfall, I was parked down by the lake, wrapped in Oliver's old flannel blanket and sipping cold tea from a travel mug. My life had gone from world's best grandma to do not disturb in the blink of an eye. I thought it would be temporary. I really did. Maybe a few days while Marissa cooled off. Maybe she just needed space, or maybe grief had turned her into a porcupine. I tried to make excuses for her. Told myself she was overwhelmed, that she didn't mean it. That maybe she'd call once the shock wore off. She didn't call. Instead, I got well acquainted with the backseat of my car. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Every morning I do what I called a poor man's spa day at a diner on the edge of town, wash up in their restroom, change into yesterday's clothes, and nurse a single cup of coffee for 3 hours like I was guarding a national secret. I got real good at pretending I belonged places I didn't. You learn the art of invisibility pretty quick when you've got nowhere to go. I rotated between parking lots, mostly staying away from Oliver's neighborhood. Didn't want to risk running into someone who'd ask how I was doing. What was I supposed to say? Oh, fine. Just living out of my hatchback while my grandkids think I vanished into thin air? No thank you. There were nights I cried so hard I thought my ribs would crack. And others where I just stared at the ceiling of the car, trying to remember what silence used to sound like before it was filled with loneliness. Being abandoned by family hits different. It's not like losing a job or a lousy date. It unzips your sense of self and leaves you standing there, shivering, wondering if you imagine the whole thing. 5 years I gave that woman. 5 years of cleaning her bathroom grout, packing lunchboxes, and pretending I liked her bougie kale salads. And she dropped me like expired milk. Anyway, that's how it started. Just me, a blanket that smelled like Oliver, and a car that became the saddest little home you've ever seen. I didn't know what came next. I just knew I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. I hadn't planned to drive by the old house. Truly I hadn't. But sometimes your heart takes the wheel and forgets to ask your brain for directions. It was early. One of those misty spring mornings where the dew still clings to the grass like it's got nowhere else to be. I figured I'd roll through the neighborhood just once, and maybe catch a glimpse of Emma and Leo walking to school. I missed their faces. I missed brushing Leo's hair out of his eyes and tying Emma's shoelaces double tight like she liked them. Just a peek, I told myself. No harm in that. But what I saw when I turned the corner made my stomach lurch. There was a moving truck parked in the driveway, its back open like a hungry mouth. A crew of men was hauling furniture out the front door like it was clearance day. And there, standing with a clipboard in one hand and her phone in the other, was Marissa, directing traffic in a pair of leggings and a cashmere hoodie like she was coordinating a photo shoot. I pulled over half a block away and watched. Shouldn't have, but I couldn't help myself. The first thing I recognized was Oliver's easel. That old thing had paint smudges in every shade of green and yellow. He'd had it since college, sturdy, dependable, a little squeaky when you adjusted it too fast. One of the movers hoisted it up like it was junk and marched it toward a giant metal dumpster that had been dropped on the edge of the lawn. A dumpster. Not a donation truck. Not a storage unit. A straight-up dumpster. My eyes started scanning what else was being carried out. I saw boxes labeled studio in Oliver's handwriting. His neat little print that always made him look like he belonged in a science lab instead of an art studio. I saw rolled-up canvas, his old herbarium folders, and a wooden crate full of seed catalogs and pressed flower samples. One man came out carrying the armchair Oliver used to curl up in with Leo, reading books about bugs and outer space. I sat there frozen. My fingers dug into the steering wheel like it might anchor me to something real. It felt like watching him disappear all over again, only this time piece by piece in broad daylight. The kicker was when they wheeled out that little table from his office, the one where he used to sit and sketch while sipping ginger tea. I could still picture the burn mark from when Emma knocked over a candle during a power outage. He'd laughed it off and said it gave the table character. Well, now it had character and a one-way ticket to the landfill. I should have looked away. I should have driven off, turned the music up, and reminded myself that material things aren't what make a person. But when it's all you have left of someone you love, watching it get tossed like last week's leftovers, it hits different. I wasn't just mourning Oliver. I was mourning the history in that house. The blanket we stitched during one of his long recovery days. The bookshelf we assembled while he tried to follow the instructions and I supervised with a glass of wine. The garden gloves we used every spring to plant daffodils by the kitchen window. Gone. All of it. Replaced with sleek chrome furniture and sterile white walls you couldn't lean against without feeling like you might smudge something expensive. I wanted to scream, but what would it have done? I was living out of my car with a collection of granola bars and a half-used bottle of dry shampoo. I had no power, no say, no home. So I just sat there, watching, crying in quiet little hiccups I hoped no one noticed. And for the first time it truly hit me. I didn't just lose my son. I was losing the memory of him too, one trash bag at a time. I was parked behind the diner again, trying to decide if I could afford another cup of their weak coffee, or if I'd have to settle for lukewarm tap water in my travel mug, when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. For a second I thought it might be a robocall or worse, someone asking about the loan I knew I couldn't pay. But something told me to answer. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was desperation. "Mrs. Thompson?" a polite voice asked. "This is Simon Grant from Larkin and Ellis. I was your son Oliver's estate planner. I've been trying to reach you." Let me tell you, hearing someone say Oliver's name out loud when you haven't spoken it in days does something to your heart. I don't even remember exactly what I mumbled in response, something between a croak and a yes. Simon asked if I could meet him in his office downtown. I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Hair that hadn't seen shampoo in too long, eyes puffier than a microwaved marshmallow, and a sweater with enough crumbs in it to feed a small family of squirrels. But I agreed anyway. Larkin Tower was one of those sleek all-glass buildings that look like they're allergic to dust. I felt like a ghost floating through a world I no longer belonged in. But Simon? He greeted me like I was royalty, offered me coffee, real hot aromatic coffee in a porcelain cup, and even asked if I wanted sugar or cream. He didn't dance around it. He pulled out a file thick enough to double as a doorstop and said, "Mrs. Thompson, your son made a number of changes to his will shortly after his diagnosis." I braced myself. I thought he was about to tell me Marissa inherited everything and I'd be lucky to get a condolence card. Instead he said, "Oliver left a trust for $1 million. It's in your name. The funds will be managed until stable housing is secured, but they are exclusively for your support and well-being." Reader, I nearly fell off that leather chair. But he wasn't finished. He leaned in, his voice soft but serious. "There's more. Your son made provisions for custody. If Marissa made any effort to remove you from the home or prevent contact with Emma and Leo, full guardianship would be transferred to you." I stared at him like he'd just handed me the moon. Simon explained that Oliver had been documenting things, notes, emails, even audio clips. He'd noticed how distant Marissa had become, how she talked about starting over, and how she referred to me, when she thought no one was listening, as his needy mother. Apparently she said that more than once. I sat there, my hands wrapped around that warm cup, trying to absorb it all. My boy had seen it coming. He'd been sick and exhausted and in pain, but still, he found the strength to protect me and his children from what might come after. He planned it all. Quietly. Carefully. Like he used to plan his garden layouts, thinking ahead to where the sun would hit, where the soil would be richest. Simon slid a letter across the table. "He wrote this for you." I didn't open it. Not then. I wasn't ready. But I held it close to my chest like it was a life preserver. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a woman who still had a fight left in her. I wish I could tell you that the first thing I felt after leaving Simon's office was a thirst for revenge. Something cinematic, like I walked out with wind in my hair, and a theme song playing behind me. But no, the first thing I felt was plain old-fashioned relief. The kind that makes your shoulders drop and your lungs work right again. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgotten. My son had seen me, really seen me, and he hadn't let me down. I spent that night in a motel that had seen better decades. The shower had squeaked, and the towels were thin enough to read a newspaper through. But I stood under that hot water until the steam fogged up every mirror and peeled the sadness off me like old wallpaper. Over the next few days, Simon and I worked quietly. He opened access to a portion of the trust so I could get on my feet. The man was meticulous, like a banker and a saint rolled into one. He handled the legal filings with the calm precision of someone who ties their shoes before a hurricane. Paperwork for custody transfer? Filed. Emergency housing? Arranged. I didn't need a mansion. I needed somewhere warm, private, and mine. We found a lakeside cabin about 30 minutes from town. Nothing fancy. A little creaky, a little dusty. But it had a real bed, clean sheets, a working stove, and windows that looked out over the water. First night there, I cried into a plate of reheated pot roast like it was fine dining. I hadn't eaten hot food on a real plate in weeks. Don't judge me. I bought new clothes, not many, but enough to remind myself I was a person with a closet again. A soft cardigan, a pair of jeans that fit right, and a pair of shoes that didn't pinch. I even got my hair trimmed by a sweet girl named Darla who talked my ear off about her boyfriend and gave me a free sample of shampoo for Bounce. And then came the visit. The official one. Simon picked me up in his car, nicer than mine obviously, and we drove to the house with a social worker and a uniformed officer following close behind. Standard protocol, he said. Nothing dramatic. Just proper procedure. I stood on that familiar front porch holding the legal documents that changed everything. The same porch where I used to water the hanging plants and tie Leo's shoelaces before school. I rang the bell. Marissa answered mid-phone call, earbuds in, dressed in yoga gear and holding an iced coffee. She blinked at me like I was a hallucination. Then she saw the officer. Then Simon. Then the stack of paperwork in my hand. I watched the color drain from her face like someone had pulled the plug. She hung up the call without a word. "Marissa," I said calmly, "we need to talk." She didn't invite us in. She didn't say a word at all. But she stepped aside slowly, like a woman unlocking the gate to a garden she thought she'd buried. I walked through that door not as a guest, not as a helper, but as a woman who finally had a say in her own story. "Game on." Marissa didn't scream. She didn't throw anything or storm around the living room like a soap opera villain. She just stood there, lips tight, jaw twitching like someone trying to remember what page of the script she was on. "I don't understand," she said after a long pause. "Why are there legal people here? Why are the police involved?" Simon adjusted his glasses the way only calm, terrifyingly competent people do and said, "We're here to execute the custodial provision in Oliver's will." Her face barely moved, but her eyes blinked once, slow, long, like she'd suddenly forgotten how to breathe through both nostrils at once. She looked at me like I'd rigged a trap, like I'd been waiting for this moment with a grin and a pitchfork. But there was no gloating in me, just the steady hum of something I hadn't felt in weeks: resolve. She tried to stall, of course. "This is absurd. She's not well. She's homeless. She's unfit to care for children. This is harassment." Simon, bless him, never raised his voice. He just opened his leather portfolio like he was about to host a PowerPoint. "Oliver documented several concerns," he said. "He wrote letters, kept notes, recorded conversations." That got her attention. "Recorded," she echoed. One word, brittle as glass. Simon tapped on a small device and out came her voice, clear as a bell. "Once Oliver's gone, I'll have to deal with his needy mother. Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can take her in this house." She swayed, just slightly, and reached for the back of a chair like the floor had shifted under her. He didn't stop there. Another clip followed, her talking about how she needed a fresh start, how the kids would be fine without constant reminders of their dad's tragic illness. The officer didn't say a word. Neither did the social worker. But their silence was its own kind of statement. Marissa turned on me then. Not in fury, more like disbelief. "You're going to take my children from me?" I said. "I'm not taking anything. I'm following the instructions your husband left. For their sake." She looked like she wanted to argue, to scream that it was unfair. But the truth was thick in the air, undeniable. We left with a plan to collect Emma and Leo that afternoon. The social worker would accompany us. No dramatics, just paperwork and procedure. I spent the next few hours pacing my tiny cabin, folding and unfolding a blanket that didn't need folding. My hands couldn't sit still. My heart couldn't slow down. It had been so long since I'd seen their faces up close, I wasn't sure how they'd react. At 3:15 we stood outside the school in the car loop, the social worker and I. I could see Emma through the classroom window, packing her little backpack. Leo was bouncing a tennis ball against a wall. They came out together. When Emma spotted me, she stopped walking. Her whole face went still. "Grandma," she whispered. Her voice cracked like a dry leaf. "Are you real or a dream?" I knelt down, arms open, throat thick. "I'm here, sweetheart. For good." Leo ran straight into me like he'd been holding in a sprint for weeks. They didn't ask for explanations. They just held on tight. And I didn't let go. The cabin wasn't anything fancy. One bedroom for me, one shared by the kids, a creaky screen door, and a kitchen that smelled like old cedar and cinnamon. But to us it might as well have been a palace. It had warmth, softness, and most importantly, permission to breathe. Our first morning there I made pancakes. Not just any pancakes. Oliver's pancakes. Thin, fluffy, full of vanilla, with a dash of cinnamon he never measured, just sort of sprinkled with flair like a chef in a cooking show. I used his exact technique. Mix the wet and dry separately, then stir together with the gentleness of folding laundry, not mixing cement. It made a difference and the kids noticed. Leo took one bite and said, "These taste like Saturdays with Dad." That nearly did me in right then and there. We ate them on the couch, plates in our laps, syrup dripping on napkins and pajama pants. Emma got powdered sugar on her nose and didn't even notice. I didn't rush to wipe it off. That house wasn't about perfection. It was about comfort. That day set the tone. The kids started coming back to themselves in small, unexpected ways. Leo stopped flinching every time someone raised their voice, even if it was just the kettle whistling. Emma began humming again while drawing, her little feet swinging from the kitchen chair like they had music of their own. We had messy afternoons of finger painting on butcher paper spread across the living room floor. The rug will never be the same, and that's just fine with me. We painted flowers and animals and a rocket ship that looked suspiciously like a pepper grinder. Leo claimed it was experimental. I told him he'd fit right in at an art school. At bedtime, I told stories not from books but from memory. Stories about when Oliver was their age. How he once got his foot stuck in a garden bucket trying to stomp down soil. How he was convinced peanut butter made hair grow faster. How he cried when he thought he'd broken a robin's egg, only to find out it was just a speckled pebble. Emma laughed until she hiccuped. Leo asked me if boys were allowed to cry like their dad had. I told him it takes more strength to cry than to pretend you're fine. It was one rainy afternoon, while we were painting flowers with cotton balls, that Emma looked up and said softly, "Mom said you left because you didn't want to be around us anymore." I felt that in my spine. I put down my brush and pulled her into my lap, painty hands and all. "Your mom was wrong, baby. I didn't leave you. I never wanted to go. I was made to." Leo sat down beside us, quietly dipping his brush in green. "I wanted to talk about Dad," he said. "But Mom said it made her too sad." I squeezed them both tight. "We can talk about him whenever you want. We can laugh or cry or just sit and think." So we did. We told stories about Oliver's weird food combos, his soft spot for bees, the way he tucked them in by singing slightly off-key lullabies. We remembered out loud. And little by little, that cabin filled with something Marissa's big house never had: healing, and the smell of pancakes. It was a Tuesday when she showed up. I was in the kitchen prepping for Emma's birthday dinner. A simple little affair with spaghetti, garlic bread, and cupcakes topped with more sprinkles than frosting. The kids were still at school. I had flour on my hands and marinara simmering when I saw the car pull into the gravel drive. Marissa stepped out slowly, like she wasn't sure the ground would accept her weight. She looked different, not put together, not polished. Her hair was pulled back in a lopsided bun, and she wore jeans that had seen better seasons. No phone glued to her hand, no designer boots, just her and a small gift bag. I opened the door before she could knock. She gave me a cautious smile, then held out the bag. "It's a plant, a little fern. Emma mentioned once she liked the ones that curl." I took it and said thank you, setting it gently on the entryway table without inviting her in. "I know it's not my visitation day," she said quickly, "but I was hoping maybe I could see them for a few minutes, or just talk to you." I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked, and saw it. The edges were worn down. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. A stiffness in her shoulders, like she'd been carrying something heavy and long overdue. "I heard you had to sell the house," I said. She nodded. "Couldn't afford it after the money settled into the trust. And my gallery contract didn't renew. I'm staying with my sister for now." That landed hard even for me. Marissa had always lived like life owed her something. Seeing her now with that life unraveled was strange. Not satisfying, just sobering. She looked at the floor, then back up at me. I thought if I kept things neat, controlled, I could keep everyone from falling apart. But really, I just didn't want to face the mess. I thought I was protecting the kids. I was just protecting myself. There it was. No big scene. No begging or grand gestures. Just a tired woman saying the words I hadn't expected to hear. I stepped aside just enough for her to come in. "You've got 5 minutes," I said. "And I stay with you the whole time." Emma and Leo arrived moments later, stepping into the house full of birthday smells and balloon strings. When they saw her, they froze. Emma clutched the strap of her backpack. Leo's mouth twitched, not angry, not joyful, just uncertain. "I brought you a birthday plant," Marissa said, holding it out. Emma took it but looked to me first. A reflex now. I nodded. She mumbled a thank you. Leo gave a quiet "Hi, Mom." The kids sat on the couch. Marissa sat across from them on the ottoman, knees together, hands folded. "I know I wasn't fair to you," she said, her voice low. "I was scared. Of being alone. Of not knowing what to do without your dad." Nobody said anything. Emma brushed her fingers along the fern leaves. After a few minutes, I stood and cleared my throat. "Let's make a deal. One supervised outing. 1 hour. You call when you leave and when you drop them off." Marissa looked up like I'd handed her a rope out of a pit. "Thank you," she whispered. "Baby steps," I said. And I meant it. We've been in our new place for a while now. Nothing grand but solid. A modest 3-bedroom ranch with wood paneling that creaks in the right places, and a backyard that looks more like a jungle than a lawn. And you know what? It's perfect. There's something oddly comforting about a home where weeds are welcome and nobody yells when shoes get left at the door. The kitchen is always humming, either from the kettle, the radio, or a child singing off-key while setting the table. Our dining room light flickers sometimes, but I call it Oliver saying hello. Emma insists it's just bad wiring. I like my version better. Our evenings are a happy mess. Dinners are loud. Elbows on the table, crumbs on the floor, and stories that take 3 detours before landing. Emma's usually reorganizing her ever-growing rock collection by color, sparkle, or vibe, depending on her mood. Leo has a sketchbook he guards like a treasure chest, full of bugs drawn with the kind of detail that makes me wonder if he's channeling his dad's old hands. I'm not just their guardian now. I'm their constant. Their calm in the storm. I tuck them in with stories, pack their lunches with notes, and remind them every single day that their feelings matter. That being silly is sacred. That it's okay to miss someone and still laugh on the same day. Marissa visits occasionally. She's careful with her words now, softer around the edges. She brings puzzles, board games, the occasional box of cookies that the kids pretend not to like but devour anyway. She doesn't try to run the show. She asks. She listens. She stumbles sometimes, but she's learning to get back up without snapping at the people around her. There's guilt in her eyes. Not performative guilt. The kind that lingers when the mirror's honest and the silence gets loud. I don't hate her. I used to. But hate is heavy, and I've got enough to carry with 2 growing kids, a patchy garden, and a house that leaks in 3 places. So I let go of the grudge. I let the truth speak for itself. Because me? I'm not the same woman who packed a suitcase in tears and left without a fight. I'm not the one who stood in the driveway trying to disappear. I'm not invisible anymore. I'm the keeper of my son's memory, the one who watched over him when he was small, and now watches over his children like my life depends on it, because in a way it does. They are my second chance to give what I gave him. Love without limits and comfort without conditions. I have a purpose now. Real, rooted, resilient. I wake up knowing I'm needed not out of obligation, but because I'm the one who sees them. Their quirks, their fears, their wonder. And the best part? I never had to yell, drag anyone to court, or throw punches in the grocery aisle. I didn't plot or provoke. I just stood my ground, held my truth, and waited for the light to reach the right corners. Oliver gave me the tools. All I did was use them.
Share your thoughts in the comments. What's the most unexpected way someone has protected or stood up for you? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.